Hi, everybody. It's Harlan Kilstein. I'm the top dog at uh, Dogington Post, and my little Pomeranian Kalba is running around in the background, absolutely furious because she thinks she's the top dog. She's not real big, but she wants that title. So she's here, and she's actually licking my toes right now. Um, well, we're here for a really interesting webinar today about ingredients in pet food. Now, we all know that there's all kinds of stuff in pet food, um, and you're going to learn what to look for, and you're going to learn what to look out for. You're going to learn how to read a dog food label. So before we get started, I just want you to know that there's a label that's real easy to read, and that's the Merrick label. And we're working with Merrick because they're all natural. They're sponsoring our Dogington University, and when you're looking at Merrick, it's pretty easy to figure out because it's real food in there. And our friends at Merrick are really happy to sponsor the webinar today. And at the end of the webinar, what they're going to do is we're going to ask you a question based on what our guest shares today. And when we ask that question, when the question is finished, the first person who answers the question correctly is going to get a free voucher for a 25-pound bag of grain-free real Texas beef dry dog food, or for 2 cases of grain-free 96% meat canned recipes. Um, and plus, and this is the really good thing, is that Merrick is also going to duplicate whatever you select and give it to National Mill Dog Rescue because of their commitment to dog rescue. Now, Merrick is made in the USA. There are no ingredients from China. It's always deboned meat, fish, poultry. It's fresh ingredients. There's no corn, there's no wheat, there's no soy byproducts. It's the kind of food that you would feed yourself and certainly your fur baby. Okay, so let's jump in, get ready. This is going to be great. Our guest tonight is Chip Sammons. He's the owner of the Holistic Pet Center in Clackamas, Oregon. It's also known as the Health Food Store for Pets. The Holistic Pet Center provides healthy alternatives to support the immune systems of dogs and cats. Now, Chip has completed animal nutrition courses at Colorado State University and at Cornell. Cornell has one of the most famous colleges of veterinary science that there is. He frequently writes magazines and journal articles. And he hosts a weekly radio program on pet nutrition. Now, just so that you get an idea about his store, his Holistic Pet Center was named Specialty Store of the Year in 2000, the Holistic Pet Business of the Year in 2006 and 2009. And this year, Chip earned the Outstanding Health and Wellness Promotion Award from Pet Product News. So he's going to be discussing basic pet nutrition, and then when we're all done, he's going to take questions, and after that, he's going to continue the conversation with you on Merrick's Facebook page. We'll tell you more about that later. So if you have questions that weren't answered, you'll be able to get them answered live from him. So we're going to switch screens. You're live.
Thank you very much, Harlan. That's very nice of you. I'm just a regular guy, a guy who happens to love dogs and cats, and I'm not an expert. I'm not a veterinarian. I'm just a regular guy who's been on the front line, the front edge of dog and cat nutrition for the past 35 years. And why dogs and cats? Well, I don't know. I just love dogs and cats. As Harlan said, I've been doing a radio program for the last 22 years, and every Saturday morning I do that live. And last year there was a woman who called up and she wanted to know what I knew about ferrets, and she thought that I should be a ferret nutrition expert. And I tried to explain to her that although I like ferrets, ferrets are nice, I just don't have the same love and affection for ferrets that I do for dogs and cats. So for me, how it all started was I had a dog, and this is my first family picture way back in 1976. And so that's the dog I had, and the dog's name is Anthony's Royal Friend. That's his registered name. His nickname was Buster. And my firstborn son that my wife is holding is Anthony Michael Sammons. So, there was a great bond to begin with as time went on there. We actually went through the AKC handbook and chose qualities that we liked in a dog. And so that's how we ended up with a boxer. And as you can see, even in this picture, Anthony's Royal Friend is looking at Anthony in the picture. One of my favorite pictures is when he's guarding the bassinet when my son was in the bassinet. So this is a picture a little bit later on, the two of them again. And then my other son playing with not only Buster but Scruffy, who we rescued off the street one day. And so, what happened, and it's still hard for me to talk about this after all these years, but Buster passed away when he was about 5 years old. And when I was at the vet's office, I asked him if it could have been the food, and the veterinarian said that no, because all foods are about the same. And that didn't make sense to me. I didn't know much about dog food at the time. I'd been feeding a food that was marketed as very healthy. But when he said that, it didn't strike true to me, because I always think of a balance in life. I thought of a continuum where on one end you're going to have pet food manufacturers who are just out for profit, and they're going to be using the cheapest possible ingredients to have a profitable business. And on the other end, you might have people who love their dogs, have show dogs. At the time, I thought of Bill Cosby and Jeff Bennett from Nature's Recipe, who started that. Guys who really cared about what they were doing. And so I thought there might be a big difference on that continuum between the bad stuff and the good stuff. And so I started studying, because I'm a relational kind of guy. I have a great affection for people, and I like long-term relationships. And it's the same for dogs and cats. And quite frankly, I didn't want to get another dog that was going to die when he was 4 or 5 years old. And so I started studying ingredients, and I came up with what I believed were the worst ingredients in dog and cat food. And I'll share those with you in a minute, but first maybe we should talk a little bit about perception. Because, one thing I've learned in 25 years here at the store is that each of us believe whatever it is that we believe, and who is to say which one of us is right? How do we know if what we think we know is true? I think in order for us to know what is good, we also need to know what is bad. Or reciprocally, if we don't know what is bad, then how could we really, really, really know what is good? I think bad and good are relative based on a person's frame of reference. So if we don't know what a particular ingredient is bad, if we didn't know if it was bad, then how would we possibly know what was good? So part of my job these past 35 years has been to identify the bad ingredients so that I won't mistakenly feed them to my own dogs and cats. So the list that I'm going to give you is my list of the worst ingredients in dog and cat food, not anyone else's list. In fact, I don't really care what other people recommend or what they say is okay. We are all free moral agents with the ability to make our own choices. The criteria that I'm going to share with you is what I consider the worst of the worst, and ingredients that have caused cancer and could at any time cause cancer. It's not the same list that I would share with you if you came into the store and said that maybe your dog or cat has an allergy. That would be my secondary list of foods to avoid, which, could be less digestible, allergy forming, or the possible cause of obesity in a lot of foods. And that list might be corn, wheat, soy, beef, or yeast. And those might not be the best ingredients for your dog or cat, but they're not the worst ingredients, which might kill your dog or cat. And quite frankly, some dogs do great on some of those ingredients. I mean, one dog might do well on beef, while another dog might not do well on beef. I mean, some dogs, lots of dogs, in fact, thrive on beef, but there are those dogs that don't do well on it. And so when people come in and say, well, I would never feed corn because corn is hot, I might agree with them. And, although we don't carry any products here at the Holistic Pet Center with corn, I know there are a lot of dogs that eat corn products and actually live long lives. So corn, this list that I just gave you, the secondary list, it's not the worst. So the list that I think is the worst of the worst, one more picture there. I love that dog. Not to mention boys, of course. I have 3 sons and a daughter, and we've had boxers the whole time, and it's just, I love boxers. I just love boxers. They are so good, and I have a boxer now on a later slide that I'll show you. But this is the criteria that we came up with years and years ago, and it's the same criteria we have, and this is on this sheet, the same sheet that we've had for all 25 years that we've been here. So byproducts, as most of you probably already know, the official definition in the AAFCO handbook says that they can be other than meat. And so when you just think about that concept for a minute, other than meat, and it's a whole range of items that are, they include 4D meats, dead, dying, diseased, disabled. They can include all that stuff. And in the AAFCO handbook, it says that, it's according to good manufacturer's process, and most of this stuff, the hooves, the hair, the hide, the beaks, the feet, the feathers, that it doesn't go into food, but nobody knows really what goes in the food at any plant, if we just take their word for it, and what their perception is. So if you have a business guy whose perception is that all of these things are protein sources, and he wants cheap protein sources, then all of this can be in the food. And since there are not FDA inspectors in every plant every day checking on things, it's just one of those gnarly things about what ends up in pet food. So when we look at byproducts, you can say that beaks, for example, chicken beaks, are protein. Yes, they are protein. But if you do the comparison for your own dog or cat and say, okay, which would be better for my dog or cat? A bowl of beaks or a bowl of real muscle meat? We'd all go with the real muscle meat. So we've never had any byproducts in any of the products that we've carried here at the Holistic Pet Center. It's just one of the items. And the next 2 items, the BHT, BHA, as well as the ethoxyquin, of course, most of you recognize as artificial preservatives. So every dry food needs to be preserved with something. And so BHA and BHT have been implicated so many times through the years as causing cancer. They're prohibited in a lot of countries throughout the world. And then, of course, ethoxyquin came along, I think it was in 1988 or 87, right around the late 80s, and that was created by Monsanto. Because at the time what happened was that pet food manufacturers wanted a longer shelf life to make it more economical for them to make the food. Because if you can just run one formula and you can run a whole warehouse full of that formula before you change the machine and change everything else, it's going to be more economically feasible. And so they were looking for an artificial preservative that had a longer shelf life, among other reasons too. And so they invented ethoxyquin, which is an artificial preservative that at the time they said it had a 4 or 5 year shelf life. And so, of course, the first question is, how bioavailable would a food be after 4 or 5 years to begin with? And, of course, ethoxyquin through the years has been very one of those hot-button topics that the people who used it said it was fine, yet there were a lot of court cases, a lot of gag orders, and other things that happened. And originally, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services said that it was perfectly safe. But then about 10 years ago, they came out with another memo to pet food manufacturers, and they said, well, you know, it's not quite as safe as we thought it might be originally, so we're going to suggest that you stop using it. And so some companies have continued to use it, continue to use it now as well. Some of the bigger companies have used it up until, you know, just the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. So we have never allowed that. In fact, there was a company that came out in the mid-90s, and they had been using it, and they came out with a brand new product, and they chose to use natural antioxidants, which also preserve food just as well as these artificial preservatives do. And so I called this company up, and I said, hey, congratulations, I'm glad that you're finally getting into the natural antioxidants. And the person on the phone said that they still believed in ethoxyquin, but they knew that there was a segment of the natural market that didn't think it was good. And that's the only reason they changed, but they said they still stood behind ethoxyquin. And so that kind of disappointed me because I had hoped that times were changing. So the good news is that vitamin C, vitamin E, you know, rosemary, there are a lot of natural antioxidants that do just as good of a job preserving food for a year or slightly longer that the BHA and BHT did. So, you know, we can look at a bag of dog food, and if it's preserved artificially, you know, for us, we would just say, no, thank you. Now, also, artificial colors. Forget for a minute that dogs and cats either cannot see colors, you know, and there's a lot of information out there about cones in the eye and what they can see and they can't see, but they can't see the vivid colors that we see. And so whenever you see artificial colors in a dog or a cat food, it's there for a marketing purpose for us so that we think it looks better. Dogs and cats don't care. So artificial colors, of course, have caused cancer, and that's one of the reasons, in fact, why the FDA was formed back in 1906, because people were using dye, clothing dye, in products for people. And through the years, it's just caused lots and lots and lots of problems, and even the artificial colors that are approved now and have been approved throughout the last century have been taken to task and taken off the market and reformulated. I personally believe that every person is allergic in some way to artificial colors or artificial flavors. And so I think all of our immune systems get suppressed when we ingest either one of those. Most people are never going to notice the difference because they're just not going to pay attention. But there'll be a group of people that are going to see some kind of rash, for instance, on their arm, and they're going to say, wow, I wonder what that is, I don't know. And they're not going to connect the dots. But then a smaller group of people are going to see that rash, and they're going to say, you know what, every time I eat artificial yellow number 5 or artificial red number 40, it seems like I get this rash. And so I think that kind of rash happens to all of us in other ways that many times we don't notice. So artificial colors and flavors not only bad for we humans, but also for dogs and cats. And then sugar is always a big one, especially for people. I could give you, I think Dr. Mercola one time gave 287 reasons why sugar is bad for us. And it's pretty much a no-brainer. And then you add to the fact that cats don't even have a sweetness receptor in their bodies, in their mouths. So they don't know what sugar is. So if you give a cat ice cream and the cat likes it, maybe it's the texture, but they're not experiencing the same satiation of sweetness that we are when we eat ice cream. And so sugar also, precursor to cancer in many situations. So we don't need to dwell on that one. And then sodium nitrates, they were actually banned in the 50s, but never enforced because the meat lobby said that there was no other way to make ham and bacon and those types of things. And so, again, lots and lots of studies through the years that have shown how bad nitrates are and how, again, not only dogs and cats, but we should not do those as well. So we've had this same criteria for all 25 years that we've been here, and within these 25 years, of course, there have been other things that have happened, like irradiated foods, which we also don't believe in. And then, GMOs. We could do a whole seminar on GMOs. I mean, up here in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, they just had an initiative to try to be able to label foods with GMOs in there. And, I don't want to get off on a tangent on GMOs, but just very quickly, a lot of people are confused about the difference between GMOs and hybrid plants. So genetic engineering is actually splicing the DNA from animals and plants and chemicals or pharmaceuticals into another plant or animal. So it's a lot different than hybridization. It's actually splicing DNA. And pesticides injected into seeds weaken beneficial insects like beneficial soil microorganisms and ladybugs and lacewings and bees, all of that along with the targeted pests. And Cornell researchers discovered that pollen from genetically engineered corn, like maybe 10 or 15 years ago now, were actually poisonous to monarch butterflies. So my belief is that gene splicing is dangerous, and oftentimes it comes with unintended results, whereas hybridization has been done since biblical times, but genetic engineering and modification by DNA splicing has only really been done since the late 80s, and so there's a big difference there. And I've got three main objections to GMOs. First, they negatively affect our health. Second, they cross-pollinate with regular and organic crops. And third, we don't know the long-term effects of GMOs in our bodies because there's never been any studies done on that. So, so this list is really the worst of the worst. And like I said, we've had it for 25 years. And thank goodness there is a new revolution, and I think we need to join the revolution to feed our dogs and our cats better food. So what we've done here at the Holistic Pet Center is to bring in the best 7 or 8 foods on the market. The good news for me is that I've been to over 24 pet food manufacturing facilities throughout the country and up into Canada because I'm just a curious guy. I like to know things, and I've got lots of stories from visiting lots of plants. I mean, I was in one plant in Kansas one time, and the president of the plant was giving me a tour, and I recognized the formula that they were making, and I asked him if I could see the whole brown rice going into that product. And he brought me back a handful of brewer's rice. And I said, well, that's brewer's rice. And he said, no, that's what we call whole brown rice. And, thankfully I was wise enough to shut my mouth and not say anything else at the time. But what I thought was, you know what? You can call it whatever you want, but that doesn't make it whole brown rice. And I've seen that time and time again all over the country with what they put into dog and cat food. Stuff that they tell us is good, and when we look at the bags, it looks good, but again, there's that whole marketing aspect of what they do. And we just have to remember that marketing is the positive image. It's their job in marketing is only to tell us the good side. It's like the pretty red dress. And so the first thing we can look at on any label, on any bag, is the ingredient list. That's the primary layer, and that's what we have for you here. But the next layer is what I've done by visiting pet food plants throughout the United States and Canada and finding out what quality of ingredients they really use. For instance, when you look at animal fat or chicken fat on a label, you have no idea what the quality of that fat is. I mean, it's good that they put it down there, so we know that it's chicken fat or poultry fat or lamb fat or beef fat or vegetable oil. So that's good for us to know. But what we don't know is what is the quality. And on another tour I was at, I asked the president who was giving me a tour if I could see the chicken fat that was going into the product. And he said, it's just chicken fat. There's really nothing to see. And I said, well, I'm a visual kind of guy, and it would really be good if I could see the fat. And he said, no, really, I'm serious. It's just chicken fat. There's nothing to see. And so at this point, I thought, okay, number one, I have a red flag because I don't know if you're trying to hide something. Or two, I thought maybe you just don't get out of Kansas much and you don't know how important this is. So I said, I have this radio program and I need to paint a picture and I could sell a lot more of your food, blah, blah, blah. So he had a guy go up and get some chicken fat right off the line before it went into the extruding process. And he brought it down to me, and it was perfect. It was a clear amber chicken fat. I could see almost right through it. It smelled like it had just been slaughtered 5 minutes before. So, and this is the same guy, by the way, that had the rice. And so, this is what he should have been showing me. This is what he should have wanted to show me. He should have said, Chip, look how good this is. But a lot of times, people who run pet food manufacturing plants don't know as much as maybe they should. So, and I've seen other chickens. I mean, one of my heroes throughout time in this industry has been Dr. Wendell Belfield, who I've had the pleasure of visiting and talking with like half a dozen times through the years. He used to be a USDA meat inspector, and then he became a regular veterinarian in California and opened his own practice. And he told me about some of the chicken that he saw when he was a inspector with the FDA or USDA, and it's just really, really incredible. And so, for me, when I visit these plants, it's always been, okay, I need to see it. I just need to see the human-grade ingredients, and I need to see the bad stuff. And I've walked out of some plants and said to myself, you know what? I could never sell a food that comes out of this plant based on what I've seen. And so for me, it started out when I visited plants, I just wanted to see ingredients. And some of the best plants in the world, I think the Champion plant up in Canada, they make Origin and Acana. I was very impressed with their fresh batches every day. Another plant that I really like is the Natura plant in Fremont, Nebraska. Again, fresh batches every day, and they have a good quality control lab there. A couple of months ago, I visited the Merrick plant in Texas, and I was just so impressed. In fact, not only the dry plant, but their cannery as well. And, I'm always glad to see when I go to plants improvements that they have just made or they're about to make. Because I don't expect any plant to be perfect or to answer all of my questions. I was in another plant last year sometime, and I got to and it was a raw frozen plant where they make raw frozen food for dogs and cats. And I got to this one part of the plant, and I said, "Ooh, up until now, I've been pretty impressed, but it seems like this might be a pinch point for you, because it seems like if cross-contamination is going to happen anywhere in the plant, this is where it would happen." And I gave them the reasons for that. And they just looked at me for about 15 seconds, and then finally the operations manager said, "Well, you're right. This is the problem in our plant. And in fact, next month we start, we're starting a new modification project." And then he actually got out the plans and showed me the plans, how they were going to cut a hole in the doorway, and they were going to do this and that and have a better flow of materials. And it's like, that's great. I mean, the fact that you haven't done it yet, okay, maybe that's not so good, but the fact that you have noticed what needs to be done and you're planning on doing it, that gives me a lot of good feelings about what you're doing. And then also, in fact, when I was at the Merrick plant, and I brought up issues from the past, and they said, "Yeah, this is what we did about that. This is what we did about that. And then we also had a concern here, so this is what we're doing about that." And it's like, you know what? That's what I like. Just people making progress on a regular basis. So let's see if I can go to my next slide here. So this is our mission at the Holistic Pet Center. Our job is basically to share information, to help consumers look past the advertising and at the actual ingredients that our companion pets are ingesting, and then to do all that other stuff, because that's what we love doing. Now, one topic that always comes up is obesity, and there has been so much time given to obesity in dogs and cats that it's just one of those things that it's not that hard. I mean, it's like with people, there is no secret to obesity. It's generally a good quality, grain-free food, whether it's raw, frozen raw, freeze-dried, canned, kibble, if we're talking dogs and cats, or even if we're talking people, it's sensible food. It's whole health made right. It's balanced nutrition. And of course, the part is the same. It's the same for we humans as it is for dogs and cats, and that is daily exercise. And so, one of the things we have to remember is that for us, every extra pound of weight increases stress on our knee joints 3 to 5 times. I mean, it seems like that would be enough. So one of the things that I did, one of the reasons, in fact, I went back to Cornell for the little nutrition class that I took, was the leading expert in the nation was going to be talking about obesity. And this was like 20 years ago. And I was so excited because I'd read all this guy's articles. And, I went to a seminar and I listened for a couple of hours. And to tell you the truth, I was bored to tears. This guy talked about milligrams per kilogram for 2 hours. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big math person. And it's like, well, I don't know if it has to be this complicated. And so I listened to the whole thing, and then afterwards people went up and asked him questions. And of course, I kind of laid in the back, and I listened to all his questions, to everybody questioning him. And then finally there was just him and me. And so I said, "Well, what kind of dog do you have?" And he said he had a golden retriever. And I said, "And how's he doing?" And he said that his golden retriever was in trouble for chasing a cat. And I said, "Well, that happens. I mean, was it the first time that he did this?" And he said, "Well, actually, it's the second or third time he's done it." And I said, "Well, don't you have a fenced yard or something so he doesn't do that?" And he said, "Well, no, he doesn't normally do it. He just does it every so often." And so right away, again, for me, and you have to excuse me, I'm an analytical type of person. I thought, well, are you an irresponsible pet owner? Because if your dog is chasing cats, what about those poor cats? I mean, it's not good for them. So anyway, I said, well, how's his health? And he said, well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but he's a little overweight. And I said, well, what, 5, 10, 15 pounds? What are you talking? He said, probably about 10 pounds. And I said, okay. I said, well, what do you feed? And he said, well, I feed Science Diet Senior. And I said, oh, okay. I said, that doesn't make sense. I said, how long have you been feeding that? He said, well, not very long. I said, well, what were you feeding before that? And he said, well, I think you know. And I said, oh, so you mean to say Science Diet Maintenance? And he said, yeah, we get a pretty good deal on that. And it's like, okay. I said, well, you just talked for a couple of hours about milligrams per kilogram. And so I'm wondering, in your own personal case, what is it with your dog? Why do you think your dog is overweight? And unfortunately for me, this guy gave me probably the worst answer that he could give me. And his answer was, well, I think my wife probably feeds him too much. And it's like, oh man, not the spousal thing. I mean, you're going to blame your wife on this? I mean, here you are, the expert in the world on obesity in dogs, and you're going to blame your wife? So, I didn't appreciate that very much. And then when we talk about obesity, sometimes, of course, we're talking about senior dogs and cats. And when you're talking about senior dogs and cats, I don't believe the old school theory by Dr. Mark Moore Sr. that old dogs should have their protein and fat levels cut to some ridiculous level so as to not burden their kidney or liver. I mean, if you have a healthy dog or cat and you cut their protein and fat levels because you believe his theory, which has been passed on and on and on without significant studies, then I think what we're doing is depriving a dog or a cat from fueling his or her muscle mass, because that's one of the primary jobs of protein, to build muscle. So if you subscribe to the theory of putting a dog or cat on a senior food simply because they turn, 6 or 7 years old, I think you might be doing them harm and actually forcing them into some kind of senioritis. Now, of course, if you have a dog or a cat with a kidney or a liver problem or a major weight problem, then you'd probably, you would need to consider cutting calories. But when we cut calories, we need to always remember what kind of calories we're going to cut, realizing that dogs and cats have no need for carbohydrates at all. Okay, now real quickly, let me go to the next slide, because I did have somebody on Facebook who's going to be listening today ask me about vitamins. So we have our own vitamins here called Vetline Veterinary Vitamins, and we have them because of these reasons here, because heat destroys vitamins and minerals. And we all know that. And then also, depending on what you're feeding your dog or your cat, whether it's dry or something from scratch or canned or whatever, vitamins are the best insurance to make sure that your dog's getting what they need. And so I'm a big believer in vitamins, and ours have vitamin C, vitamin E, trace minerals, fatty acids, acidophilus, glandulars, organic sulfur, spirulina, all the good stuff in there. And then particularly, we use all food grade ingredients made in an FDA certified lab right here in the Great Northwest. It's the most complete formula on the market that I can see, and they're hypoallergenic. So, I am a big believer in vitamins, and I'm talking about just a general vitamin here, an everyday vitamin mineral supplement, which is different from the other vitamin categories, the specialty categories that people look at, like, okay, what do you do for joints? Are you going to have some kind of glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate kind of thing, which I believe every dog and cat needs also, even in a maintenance dose. And I think probably the best brand on the market right now, or one of the best brands, is In Clover Connectin. In Clover does a great job. The biochemist who put that formula together not only put in a great source of glucosamine and chondroitin sulfate, but she also added 9 different herbs some of them to decrease inflammation, because if you don't decrease the inflammation, the little tiny or the big molecule is not going to get through to the little capillaries where it needs to get through. And then she also put in some herbs to increase circulation. So, I could keep going for a couple of hours, Harlan. If you want to cut me off now, that would be all right. I don't know how long you want me to go.
Well, let's see what kind of questions we have, guys. If you have questions, this would be a really good time to type them in. Some of the questions are here already. Let's go. Teresa wants to know, do dogs have taste sensors for sweetness? I assume that the fructose in fresh fruits is all right to feed a dog. Is that true?
Well, dogs do have some taste sensors, unlike, for sweetness receptors, unlike cats. So dogs taste more things. But that brings up another point with the senior thing I was just talking about, and that is a lot of people ask me why their cats and dogs get so finicky when they get older. It's because the olfactory nerves inside the nose kind of get smushed together, and they can't smell as well as they used to. So whether it's a taste gland that's been working overtime for years and years, or their olfactory nerves, there's generally a good reason why older cats and dogs sometimes need their food spiced up a little bit. And I'm sorry, but I forgot the second part of that question.
Hold on. Taste, is the fructose in fresh fruit all right to feed a dog?
Yeah, well, it's the same way for dogs and cats as it is for humans with fructose, and that is that some fructose is okay, but what is being recommended to us anymore is not to eat very much fruit because it is so concentrated in fructose. And one of the just little tidbit things is a lot of people are going to the acai nectars and all of that kind of stuff as sweeteners without realizing that acai actually has more fructose than high fructose corn syrup. And so a lot of times when we get into the artificial sweeteners, we're not doing our dogs or cats or ourselves any favors at all.
Are you talking about acai or agave? Sweetener.
Yeah, well, thank you, because a lot of people pronounce things different ways, so we're gonna go with acai.
Okay.
We'll get the old Ethel Merman record out and talk about pronunciation of things.
Okay, Robin wants to know that she home cooks for her mini schnauzer. She combines chicken, sweet potatoes, carrots, peas, green beans, blueberries, and apples in a slow cooker. Does this sound like a reasonable combination?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great combination. And she can do it in a slow cooker, but what she might also just note is that she would be feeding more enzymes if she fed all that stuff raw. I mean, she doesn't have to put it in a slow cooker. So if the dog can break it down, that might be a possibility as well.
Okay.
In fact, on that formula you just said, it reminds me of one of the several of the Merrick canned formulas, because that's the same thing they have in a lot of their canned formulas.
Okay, Robert wants to know, do you favor grain-free diets?
I do. I really do, because when you think about the ancestral diet of a dog or a cat, there were no grains. And when you think about the parallel in the rate of obesity and the number of problems in dogs ever since the first extruder machine was made in 1957, it's an amazing parallel of diseases, I think, that we get from grains. And since dogs and cats have no requirement for grains or carbohydrates from grains, I do favor grain-free foods most of the time.
Okay. Let's see. Laura says you've given us a list of things not to feed our dogs. What should we be feeding them?
Okay, good question. I'm glad she asked that, because another almost trick of the industry is putting in fresh meat as the first ingredient, making us believe that there's more meat than anything else. But the fact is, with some companies, they put in fresh meat, and fresh meat is maybe 1/10 of the protein of, say, chicken meal. So meal is whatever it's dried, whatever precedes the word meal. So if it's chicken meal, it's generally chicken meat that's dried out. And so you get a lot more protein from chicken meal than you do with chicken. So what some companies do is they use chicken or any whole animal as the first ingredient. And whenever I see that, I know there has to be more protein in the formula. So if after that they use chicken meal, it's like, okay, that's good. But if instead they're using corn gluten meal or some kind of gluten meal, it's like that's not so good. So they've taken the easy way out with profits. And so chicken or turkey or beef as the first ingredient might be good, but we always need to follow it with what else is there. And so chicken meal is good, or any of the meals are good by themselves unless they say byproduct meal, then it wouldn't be so good. And so, the peas and the carrots and, some of the bags, I'm thinking of one bag in particular, and I don't want to chastise the company, but they prominently have peas and carrots on their bag to make us believe that that's mostly what's in the bag. Yet when I look at their ingredient list, it's the 17th and 18th ingredients, which means you don't get very much. So really we want to concentrate on the first 4 or 5 ingredients in any dog or cat food. And so, some companies do a good job of stringing together several protein sources and vegetable sources. That's what I like to see the most.
Okay. How do you feel about marrow bones?
I like them. I mean, I think bones, raw bones, are God's natural toothbrush from the wild. I mean, that's how dogs and cats have cleaned their teeth for years and years and years and years, and marrow is a good source. Now, of course, when I say bones are a good source, I'm talking raw bones. So a poultry bone, chicken or turkey or whatever, is hollow. So if you cook that and then give it to your dog or cat, then you would risk that bone splintering. And so bones that splinter have always been a problem, but raw bones generally don't splinter, and that's why they're so good for dogs and cats cleaning their teeth. And I might also add that the University of California Vet School at Davis suggested that only dry food only accounts for 5% tartar reduction. And so their number one recommendation is some kind of a chewing device, just as a dog or a cat would have in the wild.
Okay. Let's see. What kind of raw bone do you recommend for small dogs under 10 pounds?
Well, there are a lot of marrow bones that are small like that. We have, in 1988, when I started this store, I started with one freezer, and I actually brought in big slabs of liver and kidneys, and I cut them up into 1 pound sizes, and I put them in a Ziploc bag in the freezer. And so now, 25 years later, we have 5.5 freezers. And in those freezers, we not only have the best frozen raw foods on the market, which I think are Northwest Naturals, Nature's Variety, Stella and Chewy's. So we've brought in the best ones in the market, and some of the freezers also have good combinations of raw bones. So for anybody looking for a good quality raw bone, I would say go to an independent pet store and check out their freezer sections, because most of the good companies that do raw frozen food now also have bones, raw frozen bones.
Okay. We have a question here. I feed my dogs a combination of raw and dry kibble. I've been told to feed these food types of food separately because how they are digested. Is this accurate, or can I continue to mix them together as I currently do?
Yeah, that's one of those things that the reasoning on it is that they break down at different levels in a dog's body. So the raw is going to break down much quicker than the kibble. And so that's why they say don't do it at the same time. But I don't know. I just always thought that was kind of like splitting hairs. I mean, you're going to find advocates that, say that that's the way it should be, feed them separate. But to tell you the truth, I've never noticed any difference with my dogs who, there is the whole case of, okay, a raw food diet is really the best diet for a dog or a cat. But my dogs and cats also like kibble. And so I give them both. So I don't think that's a major issue. Some people would disagree, but I don't see it as a big deal.
Okay. Any more questions? Type them in. Any more questions? I'm taking back the screen for.
Okay,
here.
that's good. One other thing that I might mention is products from China. You had mentioned earlier, or somebody did, that Merrick doesn't have any ingredients from China. And when I was there on my tour, I asked about sweet potatoes because Merrick uses a lot of sweet potatoes in various formulas. And I was astounded at how much more Merrick pays for sweet potatoes, local sweet potatoes from Texas, than they do from imported sweet potatoes from China. And so it's one of those situations where, it's easy and it's kind of trendy now for some companies to say, oh yeah, we have China-free products here. We don't have any ingredients from China. And some people just let that roll off their lips as if it's no big deal. But, I want to tell you that is a big deal because when a company, and not only Merrick, there are other, a couple other companies who do the same thing here, they're paying a lot more for their formulas so they don't have ingredients from China. And I think that is a really big deal. I'm really glad that there are companies like this who, 25 years ago when I started my store, there were only 4 foods on the market that met my criteria. But today, there are a lot more foods that meet my criteria and a lot more foods that I think, the people at those places really care about what they're doing. So I would have a hard time having a health food store for dogs and cats if I didn't have good partners that, believe things, kind of like the same way I do.
Okay. All right. We are we got 2 more questions. When feeding ground meat and bones and organs, do we need to add fruits, veggies, and supplements?
Yes, absolutely. If you just feed meat to your dog, you're going to kill your dog because there's going to be an improper balance. So it's all about balance. And although I am a raw food advocate, I'm also an advocate of balanced food. I think it was Dr. Pitcairn one time who said the best thing you can do for your dog or cat is to feed them a balanced raw food diet. But the worst thing you can do is feed them a raw food diet that's not balanced.
Okay. And Nicole, for the last question of the day, how do you feel about the difference between small breed foods and regular? Is there really a difference? Is it important?
You've got some people out there with some great questions. This is a very intelligent audience, and
We
I
we have
appreciate
we
it.
have a tough list.
Well, it's a list of people. I mean, they're asking questions that I wish more people would ask. So whether it's small breed or big breed, let's go back in history just for a minute. When they first introduced large breed formulas on the market, there were 3 companies that came out with them within 3 or 4 months. And each one of those companies took a different philosophical approach. One had high protein and low fat, one had high protein and low fat, and the other was somewhere in the middle. And in all the ingredients, there were no magical ingredients. The ingredients were pretty much the same. And so, way back then it was like, you know what, this just seems like a market share grab, trying to convince people if they have a large breed dog, maybe you need a large breed formula. And I think it works the same whether it's large breed or small breed. It doesn't really matter whether it's large breed or small breed. What really matters is what are the quality of ingredients in the food. So, and the only really difference is one of them was kibble size, so the large breed kibble had bigger kibble, which isn't necessarily a good thing. And the small breed kibble, I can understand that where they have smaller kibble. But the good news is there are a lot of great foods on the market now that have a small sized kibble. So I'm not particularly in favor of large breed formulas, small breed formulas, or especially the tartar control formulas, which are sometimes just really, really hard on the stomach. Or the breed formulas, as if a German Shepherd dog needs a different formula than a Boxer does for the most part. I don't believe in those either.
Here's our question. What are the 4 Ds that are allowable in byproducts? What are the 4 Ds that are allowable in byproducts?
Is that a question for me?
No, that's for our audience. Anybody who wants to win the Merrick? Ooh, Cheryl has got it right. Cheryl answers, it is dead, diseased, disabled, and dying. Fantastic work. Cheryl, you know what to do. You know the drill. I think Cheryl's won before. Is that correct, Cheryl? Yes, she has. Wow. And she's probably taking notes on this stuff. But just send us another email to info@dogingtonpost.com with your details, and we'll get that over to Merrick. She has scored another bag. So Cheryl has won a free voucher for a 25-pound bag of Merrick's new grain-free real Texas beef, or the 2 cases of the cans. Plus, in Cheryl's honor, Merrick will donate a bag to National Milk Dog Rescue. Now, if you had questions that didn't get answered, or Cheryl goes, I love these webinars. Yeah, you keep on winning, Cheryl. You can love them all you like. Continue the conversation with Chip over on Facebook.com/Merrick Pet Care. Chip, it was really interesting. Thanks a lot for coming along and playing with our crowd. And everybody, Brandy, Brooke, who are busy recording, thank you so much. Everybody, thanks for being here, and we will be back with more information in Merrick Dogington Post University. Everybody, have a great night.
Thank you.